I created the Verb maze game many years ago. Playing games on devices like Kahoot or quizzes is definitely engaging for students, but I wanted a game that incorporated teamwork and listening to one another, as well as engagement. I admit I enjoy quiet time in class. I like when students work by themselves, but I also understand that this can be very boring for the students day in and day out. So I try to incorporate some collaborative work. But as we all know, collaborative work can be really great, but sometimes students begin to discuss topics other than the work you've assigned to them. So what could I come up with that incorporated quiet and teamwork? This is how I developed the maze game. Before discussing how to play the game, I want to give a helpful tip. Make sure you keep a blank sheet with the trophy and maze tracks. This way you can make different games for all different verbs and tenses whenever you'd like on this blank template. This game specifically targets a grammar topic that you're covering in class, like present tense or preterite tense. Along the two tracks that lead to the trophy, I write numbers such as 1 through 10. I place a subject pronoun like tu along with an infinitive like comer with each number. Before beginning the game, you'll have to split your students into two teams. You could use this as an opportunity to differentiate by creating teams yourself with strong and weak students, or you could split the class in half or count off by 2. I've done it all sorts of ways and it's always worked out. Once you have your team, you'll tell Team 1 that they're following the verbs on the top track, and Team 2 will follow the verbs on the bottom track. It's usually good to repeat this because students look at the wrong track sometimes and get confused. Students on the teams are not allowed to speak to one another, and they cannot write down any of the information they hear throughout the game. Paying attention and listening are the most important factors of the maze game. One student from each team picks a number between 1 and 20. The team that picks the number closest to the number you've chosen begins the maze game. Before beginning the game, I reiterate the importance of pronunciation because I only base the answer on what each student says. There is no writing. We begin the game with the first student on the team. Let's say we're doing preterite tense. Number 1 on the maze would say the yo form of hablar. If the first person answers correctly, we move on to the second person for number 2. No one can talk except the person taking that turn, meaning teammates cannot give each other answers. If the next person on the team answers incorrectly, we would move over to the other team and they would begin with their first person on their track. Remember, there are two teams with two different tracks to the trophy. These two tracks do not have the same verbs or the same verb forms. When someone on the other team answers their question incorrectly, we go back to the first team. You do not start back at student number 1. You start with the student who's after the last student who answered incorrectly on that team. This student must start back at number 1 on the track, not where their teammate last missed. If a team reaches number 8 out of 10 and the student misses that one, it can cause some frustration. But isn't that the fun of the game? I always remind students at this point that if they've been listening, they've heard all of the correct answers up to that point, so no one should miss any of those answers when they go through them again. As a reminder, it's very important throughout the game that no one's talking or writing because this would give students a big advantage if they're telling teammates answers before their turn or writing down all the previously correctly answered questions. This game is really about listening when it's your teammate's turn and remembering their correct answers. Once a team consecutively answers all their questions on their track in one turn, that team is the big winner. Students are always so excited to finally have gotten through their track as a team. I always provide an incentive before the game to make the competition a little more enticing to the students. It's usually something small like a homework pass or 5 extra points on their quiz, since we're usually using this game as a fun review before a test or quiz. After a team has won the Verb Maze game, I like to go through both tracks with all of my students out loud. This allows me to point out any common errors and get feedback from the students about why they struggled with some of the verb conjugations. It's also a nice way to practice pronunciation as a class, since they struggle with the correct vowel sounds. I love to play the Verb Maze game, but I don't use it too often. The students can get worn out on it if it's played too much. I like to keep it novel, something they definitely remember playing, and with enough time in between, they're very eager to play again. It's also a game that forces students to answer individually for their team. This can be hard for some students because they tend to be more comfortable blending in with the crowd, or they get a little embarrassed when they answer incorrectly. I always go over how important it is to treat each other kindly, even if someone messes up, because we all do it. This is one of my favorite games I play with my students. It incorporates teamwork without being too loud or boisterous in the classroom. It forces students to really listen to each other and pay attention throughout the entire game. And it's a great way to practice verb tenses and pronunciation. I hope you and your students find it really useful and enjoyable as well.